Hello and welcome. The economic influence of the Muslim middle class is growing rapidly, but is it enough to transform the often rocky relationship between the Islamic world and the West? Global headlines are usually dominated by the dramatic conflicts across the Middle East, while the quiet, steady rise of the region's pragmatic business sector usually makes far less news. International security organizations often focus their resources on fighting the threat of Islamic extremism, but behind the scenes, upwardly mobile Muslim entrepreneurs and their expanding base of consumers could be providing that much-needed stability and prosperity to ultimately extinguish any appetite for extremism. Today we ask, how is the rise of the Muslim middle class affecting prospects for peace in the Middle East? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we welcome your phone calls on the show as well. Joining me here in Washington, D.C. to discuss these issues is Vali Nasser, a professor of international politics at Tufts University and an adjunct senior fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations. He's also senior advisor to the U.S. Special Envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan, Richard Holbrooke. Dr. Nasser's new book, Forces of Fortune, The Rise of the New Muslim Middle Class and What It Will Mean for Our World, looks at how this phenomenon could bring stability and democracy to the Middle East. Dr. Nasser, good to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I've got to start by asking you about the image of Muslims and how it's taken a knock, especially recently with the news internationally, but certainly in America, about the shootings at Fort Hood, where they're still looking into the result of that shooting and whether or not it was, the result of the guy being on a jihad or whatever. How does such an event fit in with your postulation that economics can overcome extremism?
Well, the problem is that much of the image of the Muslim world is still defined by 9/11, by extremism, by jihad, and it's very easy in the West when a single event happens, regardless of what the causes and consequences, for people to fall back to that image very easily. The problem is that the West sees Islam mostly through the eyes of jihad. There's very little knowledge of Muslims as entrepreneurs, as businessmen, as contributing to the world economy, as participating in globalization. And that's, if you would, is a missing piece of the puzzle.
Now, you talk about a Muslim middle class. Isn't there a danger in using that kind of term when Islam covers such a diversity of people across the world, so many different countries, so many different states of, I guess, middle class?
Well, true, but middle class in the West has a very clear meaning. In other words, we understand that there is a segment of society that is very important to stability, that generates wealth, that is responsible for a lot of civic activity, for a lot of political and social dynamics that are necessary to successful economies and to political stability. And my argument is that the Muslim world is not different from the rest of the world. We're too hung up on what Islam says and doesn't say, and we're looking too much for cultural explanations. Whereas where the Muslim world is most unstable or it has most extremism is because it's missing that piece of the puzzle, that critical social class. And where that social class exists, Muslim countries like in Turkey or parts of the Arab world are doing very well.
Well, let me ask you to address an email that we got from California here in the US from Abu Jamal Abdul, who wrote in, you actually wrote into our Facebook page and said, what prospects and peace have the Middle East seen since the arrival of the so-called free market? The wealth of the region is being stolen each and every day, and what was then middle class is now poor or low class.
Well, where we have the parts of the Muslim world participating in global economy, they're generating enormous amount of wealth. In Turkey, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, or in countries like Dubai, this is not oil money. It's not coming out of the ground and being sold internationally. It is money that is earned by Muslims who produce things that people in the rest of the world want to buy. So when you look at the wealth in Turkey or Malaysia, you cannot say that this is money that's stolen out of the Muslim world. It is money that the Muslims earn by selling things to the rest of the world. Now, the question is that why isn't this happening in more places in the Muslim world? And if it did, then we would have a very different picture in the Muslim world.
One more question that came in from an email from a viewer, if I may, from Sayed Arshad, who wrote in also saying, poverty and illiteracy are the key reasons for extremism and terrorism. Muslim nations should be united not against the West but against poverty and illiteracy. There should be a push to establish high standard colleges and universities and free education for poor Muslims. Is it as simple as that, though?
No, it's not as simple as that, partly because, first of all, that is not a simple task to do. In other words, providing universal education is not easy to do. To provide universal education, you need to have wealthy societies, and wealthy society needs entrepreneurs and middle class who generate wealth. If we thought about America, where does the wealth come that pays for public schools in America? It comes from you and I working and paying our taxes. It comes from small businessmen generating wealth. You need to have in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in India, wherever is Muslims are living, you need a middle class that is earning money, and then it turns around and pays for education, healthcare, social services. You look at countries like Turkey, that's where the wealth is coming. Turkish middle class is now generating wealth, and then they're spending on schooling for their children, they're spending on social services, healthcare, and other things, or they're paying taxes to their government that then allows them to do this.
Now, you use Dubai as an example of how wealth generation can create a paradigm shift in the Muslim mindset, but surely that will depend on wealth generation across the population, and Dubai certainly hasn't shown an equitable distribution of wealth.
No, it hasn't, but capitalism by and large is not equitable. Even in the West is not equitable. We can look at Wall Street, we can look at London, and we can see that unless the government in these countries steps in and provides some kind of regulatory framework, you can have the super rich and the super poor, and then you can end up with events like the collapse of the financial sector that happened in Wall Street and caused the global crisis. So, you know, capitalists in Dubai or in Turkey or in Malaysia are no different from capitalists in America or Europe. They go after generating wealth, and ultimately you have to find ways to recycle the money down to other segments of society as well.
Isn't there a double-edged sword, though, that there are those who say that it is exactly that sort of capitalism, which they see largely as a Western tool, which causes the divisions in society, which causes the rifts, and many see it as sort of un-Islamic, and it's used as a tool to further extremism, or further at least the view against the West, rather than as a force to unite.
Well, I don't think that Islam is anti-capitalist. Islam is opposed to capitalism unchecked and gone completely wild and exaggerated.
I was thinking more of those who use it as a tool, who say it is. I mean,
right, absolutely. I mean, even the Prophet Muhammad was himself a merchant, which is by some definition would mean he was a capitalist. His wife was a businesswoman. The problem in the Muslim world is not that there is too much capitalism. In most places, the problem is that there is too little capitalism. Capitalism has its bad sides that we have to check, but capitalism has been the most important transformative force in history. In other words, the rise of the West, its transformation, its wealth, its science and technological transformation are all fruits of capitalism and economic growth. That is a force that we don't have too much of it in the Muslim world. We actually have too little of it. And when it arrives, we obviously have to watch about its excesses. But at this point in time, when you look at much of the Muslim world, they need wealth generation.
I was thinking Mahathir Mohamad might take issue with you, as he blamed a lot of the global economic problems on the Western capitalism, and believed that his policy, which was based more on that sort of Sharia compliance, as what saved Malaysia from some of certainly the financial crisis in the late 90s.
That was a selective judgment, because on the other side, he was the one who argued that Islam is compatible with capitalism. It was during his prime ministership that Malaysia was integrated as the first Muslim country into the global economy. It became the 7th largest industrial export in the world, all of which were great accomplishments. But Malaysia became Malaysia not because of something Mahathir read in a book or because of his religious views. Malaysia became Malaysia because Mahathir found a way to integrate it into the capitalist global economy.
Let's get a caller in here. We've got Ahmed in Pennsylvania. Ahmed, what would you like to ask?
Yes, hi, Riz. My question is, what are the implications for the lack of real and genuine democracy in the Muslim world on economic development in the so-called middle class?
Okay, excellent.
Well, it actually runs both ways. In other words, democracy is very important for economic growth, for prosperity, for social order. But when we look around the world, we really don't see any stable, sustainable democracies that do not have a middle class standing behind it and a market economy that supports it. So ultimately, what the Muslim world needs is a middle class that is tied to the market, that values pluralism, that values moderation, and whose interests are vested in good relations with the world and prosperity and progress. It is that kind of a middle class that in countries like Turkey or in Argentina or Brazil or anywhere else in the world is the main supporter for democracy.
What do you, when you talk about Turkey, how do you regard the issue that in countries such as Turkey and other parts of the Muslim world, there seems to be an increasing support for Islamic parties, and a lot of people wonder how that will drive the balance between East and West when it comes to Islam?
Well, that's true. I mean, when you give democracy to the Muslim world and when you allow for the rise of the market, the true, if you would, ideals and values of society come to the fore. So what we've seen in Turkey is that Turkey is not as secular as we thought, but Turkey is moderately Muslim. And many of the capitalist businessmen that are behind Turkey's enormous economic growth are very pious businessmen who also fund many religious causes. But what is key is that these businessmen and the political party they support, they do not want a Sharia state, or they do not want an Islamic state. They want Islam in Turkish society, but they also want globalization. They want economic ties with Europe. They want Europe to be open to what they produce in Anatolia, whether it's blue jeans or leather or furniture. They want to sell it to the world, and they want tourists to visit Istanbul and spend money. So they understand the global economy. They want to be participant in global economy. I often compare the Turkish businessmen to middle American businessmen. Very Christian and very capitalist and pro-democracy. And in that sense, they're sane.
Isn't Turkey actually a better example of what you say in your book, a better example than Dubai?
Well, Dubai is not a sort of a whole country into itself. Dubai rather shows that all Muslims can be equally capitalist and equally middle class as any other people around the world. In other words, Dubai created an environment in which Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Lebanese, Jordanians, and Iranians can go there and all engage the global economy and prosper. And when they made money, they all go there to spend it. So Muslims go to Dubai because they like the fact that Dubai is a cross between Las Vegas and Disneyland. They don't go to Dubai because it's about religion and religious pride. They do that when they're there. But they like good restaurants, they like five-star hotels, they like water parks, they like fantastic shopping malls. So the Muslims, when given an opportunity, behave like middle classes everywhere else. And that to me is proof of concept, that Muslims, unlike the image that they have in the West, are not driven, they're not a separate breed of humanity that are somehow guided by a different set of cultural norms. Their culture is quite compatible with being part of the global economy, and that's what Dubai proves.
Let's get a quick call in from South Africa. Lee, thanks for joining us. What would you like to ask?
My question is actually for your guest. I'm just referring to what your guest said about 9/11 and the consequences of 9/11 or the repercussions to the Muslim world. You know, as you mentioned on several occasions in your programs, that it has been because of the 9/11 incident that this and that is happening to South Africa. I mean, to the Muslims. As so long ago, there hasn't been a single shred of evidence. Everybody says that it is because of 9/11, but you haven't shown a single shred of evidence other than some stupid photograph that was taken near a scanner that shows one of the participants and is not even clear.
Okay.
So why don't you show us some kind of evidence that we can see what this particular Muslim or Muslims have done?
Lee, okay, what I'm going to do is, because we have to take a short break here, I'm going to get back to the topic you've raised with Dr. Nasser. When we return, we're going to take a short break here. Don't go away.